I had a very big baby. He went over the whole percentile thing to the point that you would see him and maybe consider that he was overly fed. And doctors would ask me, oh, for sure, this is a formula fed baby. Like the underlying assumption was this baby's overfed because it's formula fed, which is bad. But the moment I said, no, it's a breastfed baby, then they would take a step back and say, oh, no, he's not overweight. He's wonderful. So there's this double standard, and there's so much judgment on how you feed your baby that was passed on to me and that obsessed me for a very long period of time that I wish wasn't the case, honestly, because some people are lucky and can have the feeding experience that they want. Some people can't. I don't think people like me should feel like saints, and I don't think people like them should feel misery.
Hello and welcome to PCOS Explained, formerly the PCOS Nutritionist Podcast. I'm your host, Clare Goodwin, a registered nutritionist and exercise scientist, specialising in PCOS because I have it too. Each week, we'll uncover the latest research, share inspiring stories, and provide practical tips to help you thrive with PCOS. Whether you're newly diagnosed, you've been struggling with this for a long time, or supporting someone with PCOS, this podcast is your go-to resource for empowerment, education, and community. So join us as we uncover the tools to thrive with PCOS. PCOS Explained is brought to you by our very own service, Ovie. Ovie is your go-to health service for women with PCOS. We help you improve your PCOS symptoms and prevent the long-term complications of PCOS by giving you hyper-personalised health advice based on your specific symptoms and PCOS drivers. We have a range of plans to suit your needs, from a DIY app-based program to one-on-one consultations. You choose what suits your budget and learning preference. And we offer a result-based guarantee on our Premium Plus plan, meaning that if we don't help you achieve your goal, we refund your money. Ovie is available worldwide, so it doesn't matter whether you're based in the UK, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, or anywhere else, we can still help you. Today, I've got a slightly different episode for you. I'm bringing you a group of women, interviewing them individually about their breastfeeding experience. So I shared with you my breastfeeding experience with my daughter, who's now 2.5, and my experience of having low breast milk supply. And since then, I've heard from many of you who are concerned that you might also have a low supply. And so I wanted to bring you lots of good stories, as well as some of those who have struggled, to help you see that this may not happen to you. It is a risk factor, but also there are many, many women that I've worked with in Ovie that have had absolutely no issue. And similarly, those like me who have had low supply, but have also had a wonderful experience, both breast and complementary feeding with formula as well. But then I also want you to be aware that this could be a risk factor for you, so that you don't have the same experience like many of the other women that I've worked with who didn't know that this was a possibility for them, and instead were just told, no, there's no such thing as having low supply. It's just a supply and demand issue. You are not feeding your baby enough, or you're not pumping enough. And that is absolutely not true. It's what I got told as well, but it is not true. In PCOS, we may be at risk, and there are some risk factors we talk about here, some red flags that you could look out for, like not developing the mammary tissue in your breasts during puberty or during pregnancy as well. Or it might be the shape of your breast, having wide set breasts or tubular breasts. Again, not conducive to good mammary gland tissue. So knowing this sets you up well, and I can attest to that. I could see during my pregnancy that I didn't have much breast change, and so I could talk to my obstetrician about that, and also knew, because of the work I do from working with many women that have, that this was likely an issue. And I could kind of come around to the idea that I may need to complementary feed with formula and be okay with that as well. But I knew that I wouldn't know until it came time. So just being prepared, being okay about the fact that we can't control everything. Just like in childbirth, it may not end up exactly the way that we planned, but so long as we have some ideas about what we might like to do, then we're well set up for that, rather than getting to the point where a baby is losing body weight and you're really stressed and you don't know what to do. So that's why this episode will hopefully help you to see a wide range of experiences so that you can be really informed if you're going into pregnancy and are wishing to breastfeed as well. So first up, we have Steph, who had an absolutely wonderful experience breastfeeding. So how did you choose to feed your baby?
So that was one thing that I think I cared about more than anything, which is so silly. Please don't do this if you're a woman and you're a baby. You can do what you can do. But I was very anxious. So I always wanted to breastfeed. I really hoped I could. And I'd listened to your podcast about breastfeeding. I got a little bit relieved because I knew my breasts had gotten bigger. Like I'd had stretch marks on my breasts and they'd got at least a size, if not 2 sizes bigger. So I was like, I think I'm at a good place. My midwife didn't really want me to do the colostrum collection before, which I kind of wanted to do just to know if it was there, but I held off. But yeah, the first breastfeed I had, because my arms, I couldn't move my arms after the C-section, they actually held on and he latched straight away and it was a breeze. And then I didn't realize I almost had too much milk at the start. So like at birth care, they were like, oh, you're like over, like you've got a lot going on. And I was like, oh, okay, that's awesome. I was so relieved. I remember the day 3 baby. Oh my God, you know, when they never sleep. I don't know. Mace just did not sleep that night. And he was just projectile vomiting because I was just like, am I not meant to feed him like the whole time if he's crying because you couldn't settle him? I just remember seeing how much milk was in there and I was like, oh, this is crazy. But I have been so blessed with the breastfeeding thing. One thing I would suggest to other women is, I don't know if it's in other countries, but in New Zealand, in the hospitals and at birth care, they're a bit behind on positioning. And I did a lactation consultant in the January and she was literally like, the best latch your baby can do is just let him find it. Because you know how they like make, I don't know if you're the same, like you line him up and make sure that he's like this and then this and this, and it didn't feel as good to me until I went through lactation consultant and he latched on like a dream after that. And yeah, I've had the odd milk bled, like the blister on the end of your nipple, and I think that was from before the latch was amazing from his end because it reoccurs in the same spot. But I had the typical engorgement that you can get in discomfort if they sleep a little bit longer than they normally do. But I think from 6 months I haven't really had that. I literally just, you can still feel when they're heavy and you've got milk, but he hasn't had any formula at all. Like I said, my midwife was amazing and she got me to express 1 bottle a day before he was 2 weeks old. Like around 2 weeks maybe. So he's been a dream on the bottle as well because she wanted me to get enough sleep, and she said either go to bed at 7 when he goes, or my partner wanted to do the 5 a.m. feed, which was fine for me because I'm not the greatest morning person. Yeah, I just expressed when I woke up, and Gia would have done the bottle at like, he would have grabbed Mace at like 5 a.m. So yeah, he's always had a bottle, which I think is so important to just get some freedom and some sleep at that stage.
That's such great advice.
Yeah.
I think that's really good. So you would do like, your schedule was like you'd do a 7 p.m. feed and then probably an 11
Oh,
p.m.
I was waking up through the night.
Yeah.
But I think I'd do, the last feed I would do, it would be about 3 a.m. and then he'd normally wake up at 5 or 6 a.m. But Gia started waking him up at 5 just so he didn't wake up and wake me up because I'm a light sleeper anyway. So he would grab Mace at 5, feed him and put him back to sleep so I could get like a decent chunk until 7 or 8. I don't know, there's something about getting 4 hours in a block as a mum that seems like such little time, but I don't know, you must get like a deeper sleep or something.
Totally.
Like that deep sleep must come in, or the REM or something recovery wise happens. So yeah, we did that for ages until he started sleeping a bit better. So he had a bottle a day, and then now he's a year and nearly a month old, and I went back to work 2 months ago nearly.
I think you're right. I think that's really good advice from your midwife, is just to be like, the best thing for most women's mental health, like, I mean, not all, you can choose what you do, but if you're feeling like this, if you're listening to this and you're like, man, I'm in that stage of just feeling so like I can't get any time away from them, I'm so exhausted, then getting your partner to do a feed. Like, we would do exactly the same. From when Floss was born, Scott would always do the 4 a.m. feed. And so it meant that I could do the 1 a.m. feed. So I'd do like the 11 and then the 1. And then I would be able to sleep all the way through until 7 a.m.
Yeah. I feed him before I leave in the morning, and then I express it like 11 or midday, and then on the way home. So twice, and I get 180 mils.
Wow.
At 11, and then I stop it at 120 on the way home, just because we just do 120 bottles. But I probably need to, I'm hoping he's going to self-wean those day feeds soon, so I can have a bit more freedom, because pumping is no fun. But yeah, I'm so lucky with the breastfeeding, and with him as well, like on the bottle or the boob, he's been a champ.
It was in a
funny position. His head had got stuck. So a C-section was the right thing to do. But obviously the recovery from that makes it harder. The milk supply is affected by that too, isn't it? The fact that I hadn't eaten for a long time. And afterwards, they just gave me 4 bowls of cornflakes, which is not ideal for PCOS either. And because he lost 11.5% of his birth weight in the first few days. So they didn't want to let me leave the hospital. Obviously, I felt that was because I wasn't producing enough milk. That was probably a factor after what we'd been through. But also with gestational diabetes, the baby is bigger because of my blood sugar levels. And then once they're born and not exposed to my blood sugar levels, it's common for their weight to drop a little bit, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm saying, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the
you know
research
this.
that I
Yeah,
could do
exactly.
on it. So I was like, it's probably a milk supply thing, but it's also a blood sugar thing for me, that could be contributing to this. And I just wanted to get home because they weren't feeding me enough in hospital. I couldn't sleep and I couldn't be with my husband because it was COVID as well. So just being so desperate to get home, I probably shook off a bit of help that they might have wanted to offer me just to get out of there and to eat some real food. I mean, food is a big deal to me. Even when my blood sugar levels are stable, food is a big deal to me. We got home and his weight continued to drop or be a struggle. We did try and top up with formula eventually, but he just vomited that out all the time, which kind of leads us to the next issue that we had, which was that he had a cow's milk allergy being passed through my breast milk, which we didn't realise till he was 10 or 11 months old. I'm almost embarrassed to say it took us that long. So what that looks like is vomiting continuously for him, being in a lot of pain and always wanting to feed, which I know newborns always want to feed, but he would have a little bit of milk and then immediately need to fall asleep and then a need to go back on because he wanted a pain relief, because when he would feed, it would push all of the air out of his stomach, which made him feel better. But then the milk that he'd just taken in would then create a reaction in his stomach, which would cause the same reaction of gas and things like that. And that would always be worse in the evening. So 6 o'clock in the evening till midnight, he would just scream, which everybody said was colic. And with the first baby, you don't really know, do you? You just take a lot of advice from other people. So yeah, we just thought he just has a really bad case of colic. When he would feed as well, because he would start being in pain, he would be biting more and scratching and climbing up me. Like people had never seen a baby move so much when he was feeding. Yeah, so that led to obviously more sore nipples than normal, bleeding nipples. He was vomiting my blood because I was losing that much blood through feeding him. Obviously, the first time that happened, I panicked that it was him. I hadn't actually even realised that it was my blood from me. Obviously, I was in a lot of pain, but again, that's one of the things that everybody says, yeah, breastfeeding is painful, and so you think, okay, this excruciating pain that I'm in is normal. That's what everybody else goes through, but it's not. It's a new level, because I'm not just talking about the first couple of weeks. I'm talking about the first year of his life.
Yeah, this was he was 10 months old by this stage, right?
Yeah. So that was really hard, and his dependency upon me because of that. I mean, I stopped work. This is what I'm focusing on. So I'm okay with being that depended upon. I just wasn't expecting it for me to so long, because it's still the case, and he's 20 months old now. His need for comfort constantly, because of him being in pain, it didn't go like I knew when he was in pain, but the way he manifested it was different than normal babies. Generally, we'd say if a baby's in pain, it will cry. But he was like me. I never did that really. I wouldn't cry. I would get angry instead. So he would get agitated, but it would come out almost like hyperactivity rather than anger. And as the mum, you can see something's not quite right, but everyone's like, oh, he can't be in pain because look at him, he's this and he's that. And so that's part of the reason as well. Whenever I took him to the doctor, they're like, he seems fine, there's nothing else going on here, don't worry about it. And I'm like, no, really, if you were open between 6 and midnight at night, you wouldn't believe me. This is a different baby. to what we have in the evenings. And, that meant he would scream till midnight and then settle on me, but I couldn't put him down. He would wake up every 45 minutes or an hour. That is still the case a lot of the time, because the window when a baby will learn to self-settle during that period of time was impossible because he was in so much pain. So, it's a long-lasting effect on his brain and his emotions, almost, of the dependency upon me to get to sleep and being rocked up and down the floor, all that kind of stuff. So as soon as we found out it was a milk, because I really shouldn't have been having dairy milk, cow's milk at that point, but because of the lack of sleep and lack of control over things, I hadn't focused on it. As soon as I cut dairy out and never gave him anything with dairy, not that I was giving him that much anyway, really, because he was so young, he stopped being so agitated and stopped being so hyper all the time. Feeding became a lot easier. He was calmer. I was prepared to take him to see somebody because I thought there was something wrong with him mentally and emotionally because of the way he behaved when he was feeding. Well, I thought all kinds of things. And I remember reading on the internet, somebody else, the same thing, thought that her child had a behavioural problem and realised it was actually a cow's milk allergy, because as soon as they switched formula to goats or something like that, it was so much better. Unfortunately, he does have a soya intolerance as well, we found out. So once we moved away from that, he's fine with goats and sheep, so that's fine.
But it's so hard to
Can
know
you hear
any
any
of this.
background noise?
Yeah. No, it's fine.
Okay.
And if anyone listening to this can hear it, you can just hear what Lucy's going through. And we've just stopped recording this for 10 minutes so that you can go and settle him. This is what time at night is this for you? Like 9 o'clock at night?
9:10, yeah, and he's back up screaming again now.
Yeah.
So.
And this is the reality of what you've been dealing with now for 20 months. And we were talking about it before we started this episode, that you were saying my health has taken a backward step because I have had to take on so much of, as you do as a new parent, of them and looking after them, especially with a child that has not been able to tell you what's going on, that you've known that there's something that's not right. He's in pain, but those positions of authority are telling you, no, you're just one of these hyper sensitive mothers who thinks there's problems, right? And you get told basically it's in your head, and you're like, no, I assure you this is not in my head. So no wonder you are kind of at, feeling at the moment like, wow, I don't even know where to start with my own health, because I have had 20 months of being so depended upon for, which is totally natural.
Yeah. And absorbed in trying to unravel somebody else's problems, I'm all into doing my own research and, trying to carry my own load, but that would have been a total waste of time if I hadn't found your protocol, that it would have just been going round and round in circles. But your protocol got me onto something that actually made sense and actually worked. But there's no protocol out there for what my baby's going through right now. And that's really hard, because you don't have time, and you need time and energy to figure out what's going on. You just don't have that luxury when you don't sleep and you have a baby like that.
Absolutely. It's that mental capacity, right? That mental capacity to have the energy to even, as you said, look, but then also to actually put in place those things when you are absolutely, utterly exhausted from not getting more than, a couple of hours sleep at a time for now, what's this, 20 months. And a lot of people listening to this will be going through a similar thing, not the same, probably sleep deprivation, but with sick older family members, when their health kind of takes a back step because they're looking after someone else as well, or someone else that's dependent on them. So there'll be so many people going through a very similar thing to you, that they feel that they haven't had that luxury of time and energy to actually put into their own health.
Yeah, it's a funny time period for you mentally as well, because you don't often get to take a step back and look from this perspective that I'm doing right now. It's survival mode, and not in a terrible way, because I've absolutely loved having Benaya. He's a really good baby. He's lovely, and I wouldn't change it for the world. I just wish it didn't have to be so hard.
Yeah. And you wish that he didn't have to be in You wish that he didn't have to be in pain as well. You know, that's the thing,
Hmm.
is when
Yeah.
you, as a mother, there's nothing worse than seeing your child in pain, especially when people aren't taking you seriously. How was your feeding experience? How did you choose to feed your baby?
So I went into it like I went with my birth plan.
Mm.
I think I would like to do X. However, let's see how it goes because everyone says this is not under my control. Then I had the baby, and I don't know whether this was your experience, but like Isabel before baby is not the same and things not the same as Isabel after she had the baby. And I'm talking within days. So I had some colostrum that I had expressed before I went into labor.
How did you do that?
And
Like, were you just basically expressing yourself manually? Did you use a pump? Like, what worked for you for expressing the
oh,
colostrum?
no, I didn't even have a pump. So all I knew is that, oh, maybe you can try and do this. So I would like spend a lot of time trying to do this. So from what I was reading, it seemed that this experience was quite easy for some people. It might be the case. It was not for me. I just put
Mm,
on a lot of effort into it. Don't ask me why.
mm,
I think I get into this like squirrel mode preparing for the winter. I do it all the time. And that just kicked in. And for some reason, I thought I had to say this just in case. So I had quite a lot of it. It was terribly hard. It was quite uncomfortable. I remember my back would hurt after I would try, and I don't even know that I was doing it well. I just had the end product frozen. I took it to the hospital. I remember I had about 16 syringes, which I thought, wow, I'm doing pretty well. Ha. Until I had a massive baby that had them in the first night. All of that. And I was like, okay, this was supposed to be my insurance policy. It's completely useless. Moving on. Put the baby to breast several times, and he seemed to be doing fine. But what did I know? There's several checkups and weigh-ins and whatnot. He was putting on weight, but sometimes I would supplement because I had to stay in the hospital for quite a long time because of my injury. And I remember sometimes the nurses would tell me, oh, he's getting fidgety, he's hungry. And they would stare at me in the eyes, trying to ask for something, but not saying it. And I remember at one point saying, I don't know what's going on. There's clearly something. Can you just tell me? Because they would ask me, how are we going to feed the baby? And I would say, I don't know. What are we talking about? And so they were asking whether I was open to give them formula. And then at one point, the lady was really stressed, and she said, "Can I give him formula?" I said, "Yeah, sure. Like, are we going to starve the baby? This is dumb." And then I went on to realize that some people feel very strongly about whether or not to give them formula, which is something that I didn't know before
mm.
having a baby because I just thought it was a matter of practicalities. Anyway, I went home. I had the already tiny formula bottle, and for 3 weeks I was just breastfeeding on demand. At week number 3, the baby stopped latching. He hadn't been feeding great from what I know now because he would took way too long to feed, and that was not normal apparently. But again, I didn't know. And then I guess he either just got tired of it or was too hungry because I have a very big boy. Eats a lot. And so I went to several lactation consultants. And in the meantime, because I was getting really stressed and the baby was getting really stressed, the whole situation was quite unsustainable. I was told to pump in the meantime. Why don't you pump? And so I started pumping. And I thought, this is a 1 week situation. Like, I'm going to give myself a breastfeeding holiday. That turned into like 9 or 10 months
Which is
because
definitely not
we
a
tried.
holiday. Thing is like breastfeeding the hard way.
And the worst thing is that this became an obsession, which again, I'm not sure that it's spoken about enough because I had a really good supply. And I was told I was very lucky. My baby was putting on a lot of weight very quickly. Oh, you're so lucky. I was getting so many compliments. Oh, you're so lucky, or you're doing very well for your baby. You're so good to your baby. I was getting like all this positive reinforcement that surely every mother should be doing this. And therefore, I was a good mother. And if I were to stop this, I would be the worst mother on the planet. And so I obsessed about it, as I do with everything. And I thought, okay, I'll just start exclusively pumping and then enter mostly a Reddit group about what it is, how it works, how frequently you have to do it, your schedule, how many ounces or milliliters per day are normal, tracking it, fluctuations in supply. Do I have enough? How to build a freezer stash, and all of these. It was insane, but I did very well because there was a lot of milk. But nobody in this planet would get my boy.
to latch again. So I did that for a very long time.
Yeah, I remember you ended up exclusively pumping for 10 months, but feeding him for over a year because you had built up such a
More than that. More than
more.
that. I'm telling you, I went all crazy. I mean, I had what is called an oversupply, which means that you have more milk per day that your baby drinks,
Yeah.
which means that you can put some aside and freeze it and build what people call the freezer stash or a milk bank for just in case situations. Again, I have, grown up with the just in case situation, especially when it comes to food. I'm telling you, I had snacks whenever. So I had this terrible mentality that obviously permeated into this situation. So
And I
yeah.
mean, although that's incredible and that's amazing, you now look back and go, well, mentally that was not great for me, right? I can
No, there was a lot of anxiety. There was so much anxiety there.
Yeah. And what do you think? You obviously think that what perpetuated this was actually quite similar to what a lot of people, how they develop kind of disordered eating, is because they're getting positive reinforcement about how they look when they lose weight and things like that. It sounds like a very similar thing.
Oh no, it totally is. So enter the situation. So I don't know what the experience of having a baby is like in other countries, but in the UK, you go at certain weeks, you take your baby and they weigh them. And so they have these growth curves, and your baby should stay within the same growth curve or maybe go up a growth curve, which is celebrated. Now, I've said several times, I had a very big baby. He went over the whole percentile thing. So he was way too big or too heavy for his age, to the point that you would see him and maybe consider that he was overly fed. And doctors would say this at the beginning of my meeting with them. And then they would ask me right afterwards, oh, for sure, this is a formula fed baby, thinking like the underlying assumption was this baby's overfed because it's formula fed, which is bad. But the moment I said, no, it's a breastfed baby, then they would take a step back and say, oh, no, he's not overweight. He's wonderful. So there's this double standard, and there's so much judgment on how you feed your baby that was passed on to me and that obsessed me for a very long period of time that I wish wasn't the case, honestly, because, some people are lucky and can have the feeding experience that they want. Some people can't. And I don't think they should, I don't think people like me should feel like saints. And I don't think people like them should feel misery.
Absolutely. I think that is so true. And I think it's especially in countries like the UK and New Zealand where breastfeeding is so promoted for, and that's great. But the problem that we have is that what they haven't considered is the effect of that on people that either choose that doesn't work for them, or it literally doesn't, when they're in a position where their baby literally stops latching. And I had a very similar experience to you. Floss refused the breast at 3 months, and I exclusively pumped, although I was always co-feeding with formula as well. So it's absolutely not within our control. And we have a similar thing where we go and get the baby measured here. It's called Plunket, which is a charitable organization. I actually stopped going. I stopped attending after the first session because I was like,
it's horrible.
I can see that she's absolutely fine. She is absolutely fine. She is not losing weight. And I just don't want the judgment, and it's not helpful for me or healthy. And there's no real value that you're adding here. You're just detracting. And so I'm actually just not going to attend. Which is a shame, because some people have amazing Plunket experiences. They feel super well, just that they feel really supported, and it's great. And they love that relationship they have with their midwife there. But that wasn't the case for me. And I just took myself out of that situation and said, you know what, this is not, it's not helpful for me, so I'm just going to stop attending, which was probably the best decision that I could have made. But then again, you are then a bit of risk where they might pick up on things that you don't. And so as a mother, you go, well, I better go, because just in case there's something that they pick up on that I don't know, because I've never been a mother before. So how would I know?
Yeah, but you know what? I had a friend that had a similar experience to yours, but she didn't step back from situation, and so instead she had the same doctor that drilled, and she had such a horrible time, because my friend, she's very tall and slim, and so is her partner, tall and slim, and so is her first child, which is a very long baby that naturally doesn't weigh too much. And that, you know, if you look at the parents and you apply a little bit of common sense, it would be quite unusual for them to have a very chunky baby. Well, none of that applied. And they, you know, they made her feel terrible over and over. And sometimes, no, many a night, even if the baby started sleeping for longer, they forced her to wake up to pump so she could push more milk into that baby. That, you know, today she's a toddler and she's skinny and tall and she's very healthy.
Absolutely fine. And I think this is the as you said, a massive double standard with the formula feeding versus breastfeeding, right? Is that they're saying, oh, well, if you're formula feeding, you must be literally like shoving that milk down their throat. But yet if you try to do that with breastfeeding, oh, well, that's absolutely fine. And it's like, hey, hang on, isn't this the same baby that is going to feed until they're satisfied, regardless of how they're feeding? Yeah, it's a crazy thing. I think that the reason that they are pushing breastfeeding is for great reasons, but I think what they don't understand is the very, very negative consequences that
Judging.
yeah, the judgment.
You could recommend something without the judgment. You could say, you know what, it would be great, but if you can't, that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's it.
How did you choose to feed your baby?
For me, yeah, I breastfed my baby. It was probably much harder than delivering a baby. For me, like I think I know the breastfeeding journey is different for everybody, but it was probably 2 months for us to figure it out. I think in Canada, I was just so lucky to have midwives. They took care of me for 6 weeks postpartum, kind of came to my house every other day in the first 2 weeks, which is, it's just something that when I talk to my friends who are with OBs, like that's, you don't get that type of care. They really, really encouraged me to do breastfeeding, which is really interesting because I am a formula fed baby. My mom mainly fed me on formula. And so I probably wouldn't have done it if it weren't for the midwives, because my mom was helping me with postpartum. I was like, oh my God, like she's starving, she needs formula. And then I was like, no, we're gonna do this. We're gonna stick it out and feed her on breast milk. I don't know if maybe you know better than me, like what's the evidence between, breast milk and formula long term, but at least from my perspective, like my husband was fully breastfed, and then for me, I was mainly formula fed. I can tell his immune system is a lot better than mine. So just from that little bit, I'm like, oh, we're gonna try it out. Yeah.
And that is one potential benefit of breastfeeding. Definitely, it's hard to know. The research isn't actually very clear on that. It is hypothesized because you produce so much like antibodies and be able to give them to your baby through breast milk. But the study that I think is probably the best well-designed study is actually a study of siblings in the US. So because so much of breastfeeding, in terms of the outcomes they look for things like BMI, weight, and to see whether that is different between formula fed and breastfed, or cognitive ability, IQ, also the incidence of asthma and eczema and other allergies. That's also thought to be due to, or maybe impacted by breastfeeding. But also so many of those things can be due to socioeconomic factors, like, your IQ can be very determined by your socioeconomic background. And so one thing with breastfeeding is that generally only people that have the ability to take quite a few months off can then exclusively breastfeed their child. And so people, especially in countries like the US, where they might not get as great a maternity leave, those in lower socioeconomic have to go back after only a few weeks off, and so therefore don't get the chance to breastfeed. And so this is where it can be really hard on the research to look and say, well, what's actually due to breastfeeding and what's due to other factors? Because a well-designed study will try and reduce out all of those other confounding variables. But it's very hard when you're looking at one lifestyle-related thing like breastfeeding. Yeah. But the one study that I thought was really well done is one that they did in the US, where they took siblings. So we can remove out all of those other factors because it's literally the same family. And they looked where one sibling was breastfed and one was formula fed. And what they found was actually there was no difference. No difference in IQ, no difference in weight, BMI, and also no difference in immunity either. So yeah, it kind of goes. But I think that certainly there is some benefit to maybe especially those early days where you are being able to pass on those antibodies to your child. So that might be, yes, might be maybe across their life, maybe no difference, but other studies have definitely not reported this. So the big Brazilian study that's often cited showed that there was people that were breastfed had a better immune system. But again, they couldn't reduce all those socioeconomic factors and other factors out of that one because it wasn't like a sibling study. So yeah, I think at the moment it's hard to know, but we do know that those antibodies are passed through breast milk and that the baby can absorb those. And so therefore their immune system is probably, especially when they're a baby, probably better than those that are exclusively formula fed. But it's a hard one. So the first 2 months you said was a struggle. Was that in latching? Was that in supply? What was the hard thing? Was it just learning and getting used to that?
Yeah, it's latching. I thought the baby would be born and then they know how to feed, but they also have to learn. So that was a surprise to me. So yeah, it took a bit of time for my baby to learn how to latch properly, and I think that definitely impacted with like supply and everything. So for a while, you're kind of feeding was like a 24-hour job. Like I was trying to breastfeed her, then I would pump, and then I would then feed her like the actual bottle, and then you rinse and repeat. I was like feeding for the whole day basically. So that was the hard part, and then yeah, I think what was interesting with breastfeeding, maybe I actually don't know this if it's a fact, but I thought that every time like I breastfed, my blood sugars would drop a lot, and I would be like super hungry and then super thirsty at the same time. So I always like eating a lot, and then I think at that time like postpartum, because we in my culture we do like a postpartum 60-day ritual. We stay home, you don't go out, blah blah blah, a lot of stuff. And then
Yeah, tell us more about that, because I think that most people listening to this will have no idea how like Eastern medicine, like Chinese, like traditional culture. So it's not just, Chinese. I know a lot of like Malaysian, Indonesian also have a similar kind of postpartum ritual. So what does that entail?
yeah, so sorry, it was not 60, it was 40 days. You're supposed to stay at home. You're not supposed to go out. It really strict. You really shouldn't be showering. If you are, then my mom would use warm wood to boil the water, and you can only use that and ginger to shower. And then for food, every single meal was some type of soupy type of meal. So it's a lot of soup. Like you drink soup throughout the day. Your meal is not like you don't eat rice. It's almost like porridge because it's all soup. It's just a lot of water content. And then basically they don't want you to touch anything cold. So like if dishes and clothes and stuff like that, like my mom would take care of those, and you can't anything cold like the wind or the floor or the water, you just can't touch anything that's cold, and then be really focused on eating and healing. So whenever possible, like if anything, it was like you can feed and then you go sleep, and that's it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that's incredible, right? Because that is what we need to do. When we're healing, the soups providing you all of the like hydration, as well as the like as often their broths, so they've got a lot of like collagen and gelatin to help with that repair of because after we've given birth, like we have a dinner plate size wound where the placenta has been detached that has to repair, let alone then if you have a C-section scar, which you've got another like 6 layers of muscle and tissue, I think it is, to then repair through. So it's like there's a lot of repairing, and plus your body needs to now gear up and start producing breast milk if that's the way that you choose to feed. So there's just so much going on that, while I think that a lot of people would find that really difficult, especially like the showering and the staying at home, and that might not quite align with their beliefs around like wanting to get out and go walking and things like that, I think that the benefits totally outweigh the cons in terms of the ability to just completely rest and focus on healing and feeding, if that's the way that you choose to do that. And that I think that is
Yeah.
an incredible way. And so your mum's there the whole time looking after you during this, right?
Yeah, usually for us, like for Chinese tradition, is either your mom or your mother-in-law. They would take care of you because they're familiar with the when they did it. If not, then you can like hire somebody. There are actually like postpartum like nannies, and they specialize in those areas and making like even the Chinese herbs and things like
Mm,
that throughout to help you heal as well.
mm. Such a good idea. But a really good idea. Even if you can't do that, then preparing ahead in advance, like, lots of soups and those like kind of stew sort of things, lots of those types of warm, nourishing, lots of liquid, lots of gelatin, those foods is such a good idea too.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that helped with breastfeeding, which is interesting because I remember my mom being like, "Oh wow, you actually recovered in terms of like my I guess your uterus has to contract, right? And
Mm-hmm.
every time you breastfeed, it does contract. But I think what she experienced and what she saw in me, she felt like mine recovered so much faster. And I think it's because I breastfed so much more compared to when she did. So that was also another interesting thing because I guess I learned that from a midwife is that you need it to contract, close that wound, and to heal.
If you're finding value from these podcasts, then we'd be so grateful if you could hit follow on the PCOS Explained podcast. This means that not only you'll get the latest releases, but also that other people are more likely to find this podcast. That's the way the algorithm works. And we all know how important it is to get good information about PCOS. So if you can hit that follow button, it means that people with PCOS that don't know that this podcast exists are more likely to find it. So thank you so much for your help there. Now stand by for our disclaimer. The information contained in this podcast has been prepared for the purpose of providing information, including about the PCOS nutritionist products and services, and is designed to support clients' overall wellness. It is not intended to provide medical advice or designed to rectify, treat, or cure any specific medical conditions or diseases. Nothing stated or shared in our podcast is intended to be and must not be taken to be medical advice. Please seek the advice of professionals as appropriate regarding the evaluation of any specific information, opinion, advice, or content contained in our podcast.